from the European Parliament here in Brussels, and another week for raw politics that saw many more twists and turns in the Brexit saga. NATO celebrate its 70th birthday, and the EU elections with only 50 days to go, predictions about what might happen. Here's an opportunity to see raw politics in case you missed it. There was a rare event in the House of Commons last night. There was a vote on Brexit, and it passed. Now, admittedly, it was just by one vote, but a majority of MPs agreed to force Theresa May to ask the EU for an extension to avoid a no deal. Now, Theresa May would prefer her deal and is still in talks with the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, to find a compromise. But the government's anger at having its hand forced and asking for an extension was plain to see. Here's what the UK's Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, had to say.
It should be clear to all members of this House that asking the public to hold elections for an organisation we are meant to have left would damage trust in politics. However, there is no guarantee the UK will not participate in European parliamentary elections if the House refuses to support a deal.
Well, we're joined now from London by our UK correspondent, Vincent McAviney, who is there. Good evening, Vincent. Yesterday we were talking about these talks between Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May. They were described as constructive last night. How has day two gone? Are we still looking at constructive compromise?
Good evening, Darren. Well, before we get to that, just to talk about how Parliament is broken. We've been saying it for weeks. Quite literally today it is. So at that end of the building, the House of Lords are now trying to filibuster what the House of Commons voted for last night and block it going through, even though they're an unelected chamber. And at this end in the House of Commons, well, the ceiling has literally fallen in. A sewage pipe has burst and the chamber has been flooded with some pretty nasty stuff. So the MPs have had to give up chatting in there for the day. So making it easy for us journalists to get all the metaphors in about how this place simply is not working. But on those discussions themselves, the teams that the Prime Minister and Jeremy Corbyn have put together of some of their cabinet secretaries and shadow secretaries and their staff are meeting again today. We understand that at last night's meeting, whilst the Prime Minister said via her spokesperson that she welcomed the meeting, it had been flexible and good, the Jeremy Corbyn's spokesperson said that they hadn't actually had as much of a move from the Prime Minister as expected. Jeremy Corbyn put out an interview in which he said that he needed the Prime Minister to walk back from her red lines. They needed a customs union. They needed to rethink immigration plans. And also he is considering having that public vote as something that's necessary for whatever they come up with. So their staffs will continue to meet today. I think it's going to take a couple more days, though, as they do a bit of a careful choreographed dance to make sure that they both look like they've negotiated as hard as possible ahead of coming up with some kind of compromise to take to the EU at that council meeting next week.
Vincent McAviney for us there in London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Nina, let's start with you, because Jeremy Corbyn is now a key part of this process, isn't he? But Labour are so divided. We've got one group of MPs telling to accept Theresa May's deal and not have a second referendum, and another saying that he couldn't accept any deal if a second referendum wasn't attached.
We're not as divided as the Tory party.
Well,
I mean, yes, we have small divisions.
Close.
We have people who are not completely convinced about having either a second referendum or people's vote. But overall, there is generally very close to majority in terms of customs union or customs union 2.0. You know, there was a majority of Labour members, they supported that. And I think, you know, we can find a way through this if Mrs May actually, you know, loosens her red lines somewhat. The red lines are the problem. I don't accept that Labour is as divided as the Tories.
Okay, you tell me here and now, does Labour want to see a second referendum? Yes or no?
It's party policy. It was agreed last year in
25 Labour MPs have written to Jeremy Corbyn this afternoon saying they do not want him to agree to a deal that has a second referendum attached.
I accept that, but there are many more who actually have written to Jeremy Corbyn and said we do want a second referendum. So I would say majority of the members of the Labour Party do want another vote on whatever the deal is, that there has to be some kind of confirmatory vote. Don't call it second referendum, call it a confirmatory vote, just to understand, because you can see how divided the country is. What we are reflecting is the fact that the country is totally divided, so the parliament's totally divided as to what is the best way forward. And the blame for all of this lies with the Brexiters, who didn't think of any solutions. They had no plan, and they've left it to everybody else to sort it out.
Let's put that to William. Is it the Brexiteers' fault?
No. There's about 160 Brexiteers in the House of Commons of 652, I think it is. And the fact of the matter is that the Remain majority have done everything that they possibly can, in order to frustrate the first referendum. Now, all this talk about the second referendum, which I didn't realise it was officially Labour Party policy, because that's very interesting.
We've agreed on a public vote.
This is simply designed to overturn the result. But in this concept of referendums, is this like women's tennis, where it's best of 3 sets, or men's tennis, where it's best of 5 sets? Do we go on and on and on and having referendums until people like yourselves actually get the result that you want? I think that that's not very straightforward.
I'm sorry, you're putting votes over and over again.
Let's bring in my Petra. It's maybe you don't want to see an extension. You don't want to see this carrying on for years to come, do you?
For the Finnish presidency starting the 1st of July, I'm prepared for everything, probably in this house. No, but it's a sad situation to see how much political credibility one country, one great nation can lose in a short time. This is how it looks from this side of Channel, that Parliament cannot vote any yes votes, yes one, to avoid a hard Brexit. And that was a great news after many, many votes, because there's no winner on that situation. It's a lose for UK, for even Brexiters, if you look at the economy, how it's developing and responding for this one. So that's why I'm personally, and I think there is modest opinion in the union side, that yes, we want UK to help decide what is your outcome from the tricky situation. And I'm always in favour of democracy. Do not be afraid using the people's vote when the parliament is stuck in one situation.
And then should we have a third one to decide, in case it's an equal? And also,
if the parliament
would the Remainers accept the vote of a second referendum if it was similarly close?
If there is proper solution, then in the parliament is now saying no, not the European Union, and that's why it really should remain on the UK to decide what they want from here. Yes, if there is a long extension with some good steps to be taken, yes, of course, EU have to respond to that wish. But then at the same time saying that it's 5th time Theresa May deal, that's not serious anymore.
On this idea of an extension, though, I mean, we are looking at like it. Is the Labour Party starting to get candidates in place? Are you potentially going to run again?
Well, let's wait and see what happens on the 12th of April first. I mean, we have to get through 2 hurdles. We have to see what kind of deal or agreement, is reached between Labour and the government. And secondly, we have to see as to what sort of extension we get. Talks here are 9 months to a year. That is what the EU would be prepared. Yeah. And frankly, at the moment, the government is saying we don't want that. We still want to leave on the 22nd of May. So it's very hard for me to speculate about European elections when we have no clarity as to what happens at the next European Council. And I think, also there's talk of some sort of conditions.
Well, precisely. I mean, how would that go down if there are these conditions, potentially of a second referendum, of a general election, of not being able to fully take part? How will that go down in the UK?
Well, I think very, very badly. I mean, the reason why there's talk of a long extension, and please note that's what's been said, is because a large number of the 27 member states, I should say, want the UK to stay in. One of the reasons is because we are a massive net contributor. Don't forget, there are 17 member states that receive money, of whom Finland is not one, and 11 that pay money. If you lose the second biggest contributor, it's really rather serious.
But I get the impression, though, that yes, there is goodwill towards the UK, but that is ebbing away because people are really frustrated with this Brexit process.
There is a time, and that's the time deadline is that we need this parliament to work. But then talking about the economy and size, there are more and more Britons who even voted Brexit in their feelings that now see the result, what would it be? And then think about it, this machinery, EU, called EU, as a tool, in a global GNB, how much is it? More than 20%. More than 20% in our hands of the national gross production. It's in EU, in our hands.
Yeah.
What do you do with this great example?
15% without UK.
3%. No, you don't have.
You are completely delusional.
Okay.
They do not need us that much.
I didn't say that they needed us.
They are not desperate for
Yes.
us to stay. What I'm picking up are member states are very mixed. They want to help us facilitate. We are the ones who've created this mess for ourselves, and we have no solution.
Well, I'm a
it's
personal
our
exception,
problem.
let me be
It's
clear.
not their problem.
I'm a personal exception.
We're not going to
very clear.
extend this discussion any further. We're going to bring to an end there, but thank you very much indeed. I don't understand how a no-deal Brexit is now highly or very likely, given the fact that the British Prime Minister has ruled it out and Parliament has repeatedly done so in the UK. So is it that you just don't trust what the Prime Minister says anymore? Is it, something that we don't, that another EU country might veto an extension next week? Or is it simply just scaremongering on behalf of the Commission, a bit like these briefings we've had this week?
There are two scenarios. One is this scenario with a deal, with a withdrawal agreement, and then there's one without. And that's where we are. The withdrawal agreement is on the table. We very much hope that it will be ratified, but that is now a process which is in the hands of the UK.
Well, there you go. That was their response for them. We're joined alongside William and Nina by Sean Kelly, who is with the EPP party here in the European Parliament, and of course from Ireland himself. Angela Merkel is in Dublin today. What do you think she's trying to achieve with her visit? Why is she there at this crucial moment?
Well, of course, she hasn't been there for 5 years, so I think she's coming in solidarity with Ireland in the position that they're in. I think saying that they're going to stand behind the withdrawal agreement and the European Union's position. And also, I would say, exploring, if the worst came to the worst, what would be the position in relation to a hard border. But I think primarily she's coming in solidarity and she's most welcome.
But this is what I can't understand, though. So we're told that there will be no hard border if there's a deal, and there will be no hard border if there isn't a deal.
Yes.
Isn't that everyone accused the British of having their cake and eating it. To me, that sounds like the Irish having their cake and eating it.
No, I mean, we have been very consistent from the outset, and we are taking the interests of both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland into consideration and representing them. And that has been seen in the European Union, in the negotiations conducted by Michel Barnier. We all want to avoid a hard border, and I think while Angela Merkel's visit was planned some time ago, as the days go by, I think the idea that we will have a hard border, I think, is lessening by the day. Because if you look at the votes in the House of Commons, they're becoming less and less extreme. So I think you're going to have a Brexit or no hard border.
We're just going to bring in, actually, just the perspective of someone else, someone who may be affected by a no-deal Brexit, whose livelihood and business would be directly affected, and that is Cart Bertson, who owns a family-run exporting business of plants, where the vast majority of those exports actually go to the United Kingdom. Cart, thank you very much indeed for joining us near Ghent in Belgium. Just explain how impacted your business would be in the event that in just over a week's time, the UK left with no deal.
Good evening. It's a real nightmare for us. We, from the start, when we heard about Brexit, we were concerned because it's our main market. And we've been trying to get ready, but the problem is that we don't know what to get ready for.
And in regards to, what to get ready for, who do you blame for that? Because the European Union repeatedly say that they have got lots of plans in place for no deal. Have you heard from them? Have you heard from the Belgian government?
Yes, we've put everything into place, but the problem is from a hard Brexit to a certain time, a period of time that gives us the chance to prepare. That's what we hoped for, and that's what more unlikely to happen.
And just to kind of talk about, I mean, your business is clearly very important to you. Do you genuinely think that if you cannot, or there are impediments to stop you exporting to the UK, what, in just over a week's time, that might be it, that your business has got no alternative? Can you not find another place to sell your goods?
For 25 years, we've been focusing on the UK. We really know the market very well. We know our customers. We've been, focusing on that one. So it's not easy to get out, and that's not our intention. But it's what's frustrating is that it will cost us extra effort, and it will cost us a lot of money, and it will not improve the quality of our plants, of our service. That's the problem.
And just very finally, I mean, you say you're concerned. How worried are you as well?
Well, we are very worried, but yes, there's not a lot we can do. That's the problem. We hope that there would be a real sense of urgency, and that the British government would really, take a decision. And that doesn't happen. That's the problem.
Jean-Claude Juncker says that he is growing impatient, waiting to hear the word yes from the British Parliament. And after these last few weeks, can you really blame him? Let's take a look.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock! So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock! So the noes have it. 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 The little order. I'm finishing.
So is this the night we finally hear a yes? Anyone can hazard a guess?
Are we allowed to hazard a guess that? I think we might do. I think it is possible that they may well back a customs union. The question then, of course, is will there be a no in response to that from the UK government? Because irrespective of what happens tonight, Theresa May and the government don't actually really need to take any notice of it, because it's only an indicative vote. But the man who's almost become a champion to some, a villain to others, but one of the most recognisable faces in Europe is the Speaker, John Bercow, roaring at the top of his voice, order! Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel today apologised for the kidnapping, segregation and deportation of hundreds of mixed-race children born during Belgium's colonial rule in the Congo, Rwanda and Brunei. This comes months after the UN called on the country to confront its colonial past and tackle present-day racism, though today's apology does not go far enough as what the UN outlined. This is what Charles Michel had to say.
Au nom du gouvernement fédéral, je reconnais la ségrégation ciblée dont les métis ont été victimes sous l'administration coloniale du Congo belge et du Rwanda au Burundi jusqu'en 1962 et suite à la décolonisation, ainsi que la politique d'enlèvement forcé y afférente. Au nom du gouvernement fédéral belge, je présente mes excuses aux métis issus de la colonisation belge et à leurs familles pour les injustices et les souffrances qu'ils ont subies.
Well, now, joining me to discuss this, we've got Elaine de Brucalara from the Belgium Métis Association, who's a co-founder of that, I should say, but also whose mother was one of the many children brought to Belgium. We've also got the Belgium MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformists, Mark Dimmersmarker, and also the communications expert and managing director of Red Thread Communications, Laura Shields. Thank you all indeed for joining us. Let's start with you, Elaine. How significant do you think today was?
It is significant. It was on the books for quite some time already that it would happen today. It is significant, but I believe it's only significant if real consequences are connected to these apologies. And as what I've heard as of now, that's not clear yet.
What real consequences would you like to see? What real consequences?
Well, there are still people whose nationality situation, their papers, their administration is not in order. So for people who arrived here, who were brought here by the Belgian government, their nationality status was quite complex, and that still hasn't been brought into the light as much, and hasn't been arranged. So that's kind of a form of reorganizing that kind of a thing. And then at the other end, what is very important is that we want a panel, a commission of experts that will look at all these different situations, all these different things of discrimination, what happened, where are we now, and put them all together and see what we can do.
How significant do you view today? The right move, do you think?
Yes, it's the right thing to do for now, but it's part of the greater story for me. We should have a look, and I mean, as a community, we should be able to express a common statement and judgment on what we did as a community in the past. During the whole period, starting from the Congo Free State under the former king, Leopold II, and then afterwards during the Belgian colonial period. We should come to terms with that. And the truth should be known and should be educated.
And that has to go beyond apologies, doesn't it?
Yes, apologies. And what Helene says is very true. If there are any inequalities still, or discriminations still, this should be addressed right now.
I think it's very clear that there is still inequality in Belgium on a high level. There was a report by the King Baudouin Foundation that did say that, for example, the Congolese community is the highest educated community in Belgium, but has a lower working rate. So, I mean, they're 4 times more likely to be unemployed. There are many, many studies that prove that we're suffering from structural discrimination in Belgium, and structural discrimination mostly pointed towards people of African descent.
Yeah, we have a responsibility as a society.
Yeah, well, but the problem is that responsibility, you know, is clearly many decades after the end of colonial rule not being necessarily sorted. And this is not something that's confined to Belgium, but we see in many, many former European colonial powers this kind of disparity between essentially first, second, third generation migrants and people who've been here for much longer.
Yes, I mean, there is always going to be that case that people who have moved to the country previously, I mean, you look at the UK, you've got the Windrush scandal, it's not the same, quite the same thing on the same scale as what happened in the Congo. But yes, you're right. I mean, there are major inequalities that exist for populations which have colonial past, and it's very, very difficult to come to terms with those a lot of the time, because quite often people think that it is digging up the past in a way that makes it very uncomfortable for a lot of people who remember it, and they think it causes more problems than it actually does. I personally don't agree with that, but you can see why these things get very messy and difficult.
But ultimately also, we've heard an awful lot of stuff about apologies and that people should apologise. What's the thought process behind that? Does that actually... Does that change things? Does it make people feel better? What's the purpose of an apology?
Well, in a public sort of communication terms, look, I'm not one of... It would be more interesting to put this question to you, actually, because obviously you have direct personal experience to it. Yeah. But from a broader perspective, it can be much about humanising something very difficult and horrible that happened in the past. And if this is the first time it's been publicly acknowledged, and it's basically saying, look, we understand what we did. We understand that there are people who live in our country who are Belgian, who've had this horrendous experience in their previous lives. We did this. You know, we're not saying we're ignoring our history. We're opening up and we're going to actually say that we take responsibility. But, as you say, it is what comes next. And if it's only an apology and there isn't the proper scrutiny that gets put in place, and just sort of before, you know, I'd like to hear what you think. You know, if you look at somewhere like Germany after the Nazi period, they have been forensic in putting their own history on the table in terms of looking at it. Yes, so, for example, you look at the Bundesbank, they've commissioned investigations.
Let's just, and then we'll come to you.
I mean, to me, first of all, I'd just like to say that apologies should actually, in my perspective, come at the end of a certain process, not in this like kind of intermediary space. And I think apologies without any clear perspective of what's going to happen in the future are almost violent, because they can be used to silence the community. And also, let's be very clear, MR, the party of Charles Michel, was also very apprehensive when the report came out, which you mentioned before. And in that report, the idea was that you have to apologize to the Congolese community, to the Rwandese community, to Burundi's community for colonization. Also, in the same point, we were talking about reparations. That wasn't mentioned in the media. That wasn't mentioned when politicians were talking about it. And I think that's a very important point to make.
Okay. Mark, just very quickly and finally on this, and I don't want to open a kind of another can of worms, but reparations, and also doesn't Belgium not just have a responsibility, like other colonial powers, to, you know, second or first-generation migrants who've come from places like the Congo, but also to the Congo itself, given the mess it finds itself?
Yes, absolutely. I fully agree. And apologies are indeed one part of the process.
With reparations. With reparations?
We still, if necessary, yes, but we still have to have the debate about it. I mean, when I was a child, I didn't learn the history in the history lessons. We were told that we brought civilization and so on to this part of the world. We weren't taught about the cruelties of Leopold II, who killed millions of people for cash. That's what happened. And when I pass a statue of him here, not far from here, I think of these people, and we should. Yeah, we should come to terms with
Guys, we're really out of time on this, but it is a conversation we're going to carry on your call later on. But for now, I'm afraid we are out of time. It's a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much indeed. Well, some would say it's not possible to go forward while looking back. Manfred Weber isn't one of them. In fact, the EPP leader has chosen to launch his big election campaign from here, the heart and home of European history. Housing the continent's best and worst bits, it's here that the Commission President hopeful will set out his plan for Europe, complete with website and slogan, the power of we. While Manfred Weber goes for strong and steady, others in his party are looking to shake things up. The former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is running for a seat in the European Parliament. He says he'll campaign for a united Europe, where the bloc can be a world military power. But an alliance with socialists isn't the way to go about it. He wants the EPP to ally with right-wing populists instead. And while Brexit is tearing one country apart, could it be uniting another? Sweden's Left Party is the latest to revoke its campaign for a Swexit, meaning all Swedish parties are now in favour of staying in the EU for the first time in almost 25 years, including the Sweden Democrats, who spent a lengthy election campaign bashing Brussels. Well, here with me for this discussion are two of our political insiders for the EU election analysis. Elmar Brok, the German MEP, is back with us from the European People's Party. We've also got Marion Harkin, an Irish MEP with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. And also joining me is Jennifer Baker, the journalist from BrusselsGeek.com. Welcome to you all. Let's start with this idea about Euroscepticism. We're talking about Sweden just there. Elmar, do you think that actually, ironically almost, because of Brexit, that Euroscepticism will play less a role in this election than it's done in the past elsewhere in Europe?
For sure we have a situation that Brexit is helpful for European integration. Nothing is useless, at least it can be used as a bad example. And therefore Brexit will help us in many countries to see more the need and the importance of the European Union. Therefore, we have an increase in support of the European Union by nearly 10% in every country. And therefore, I think I am not afraid about the European future, but we have to see that not just because of Europe, but also of changes in national politics. Yeah. We see that people are looking for a great leader again and such a thing, and liberal democracy is at stake. It's not just a European question, it's also a national question. And here, I'm really afraid. I never thought that in my political life I have to fight again for the rule of law and the liberal democracy, what we have to do now.
That's also a battle that's been happening elsewhere. But there is an Irexit party campaigning in Ireland, people who want to leave the EU there. What's your sense of where Euroscepticism is, you know, elsewhere in Europe?
Well, I think, at a low point at the moment. But as you and I know, the pendulum swings, and it's just swung in that direction now. And I think Brexit has contributed to it. I think especially among young people, which of course frightens the hell out of politicians.
Or has it just been redirected into a different type of populism around things like migration? And we are expecting to see populist parties do quite well.
Yes, but populist parties generally want to leave the European Union. And what we see now is they're divorcing themselves, as it were, from that stance. But whether that'll be temporary or permanent, I don't know. But I think among young people, there is a sort of a sense about Europe that wasn't there before. I'm not saying it's universal. It's not a great wave sweeping Europe, but it's there.
OK. Jennifer, let's focus on Manfred Weber for a bit, as we did in that little report. Why is he launching this campaign in a museum to Europe?
Well, I mean, you can understand why someone somewhere along the line thought it was a good idea. It's the house of history, you know, building on European togetherness and sense of history. But I do actually think it's pretty tone deaf. It's nearly as bad as the power of we, you know, which you've got to wonder. These slogans get more ridiculous. They're poor, tortured phrases that they turn around backwards, like change we can. I mean, they mean nothing ultimately. And I think it all comes down to much more to be a good candidate than really just these awful slogans that don't really work. And he needs to appeal to all of Europe, not just German speakers. And so that's, yeah. Someone should have stepped in and said, no, Manfred.
This week, it's Happy Birthday NATO, as the military alliance prepares to celebrate its 70th anniversary. The celebrations have been muted, and some blame America for spoiling the party. US President Donald Trump has criticised NATO publicly and undermined it economically, and many fear the alliance could be permanently damaged. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg will meet the US President in Washington today. Ahead of that sit-down, he set a realistic tone.
We have to be frank and recognize that there are disagreements between NATO allies. There is no way anyone can deny that, because just by reading newspapers or watching the television, you see that NATO allies disagree on many issues. We see serious disagreements on issues like trade, energy, climate change, the Iran nuclear deal, and also other issues.
Now, for what to expect tonight, I'm joined by Alexander Vershbow. He is a former US ambassador to NATO and was Deputy Secretary-General of the Alliance from 2012 to 2016 and joined us, I think, via Skype. Alexander, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Well, we can certainly hear you. There we go. We can see you now. How are you? We're going to ask you first, what can we expect tonight, Alexander? Are we going to see kind of divisions front and centre?
Well, it's possible, because with President Trump's obsession with the disparity in defense spending, he could have another one of his well-known tantrums, as he did at the summit in Brussels last July. But I hope that that will not be the dominant theme, because NATO is actually in pretty good shape at age 70, certainly fit enough to go another 10, 20, 30 years. And on policy, whether it's deterrence against Russia or trying to deal with some of the new threats and challenges, NATO continues to show its adaptability and its resilience. So it's a kind of paradox. The Trump administration has continued to support NATO, has been the architect of some new initiatives to increase the readiness of allied forces. Yet the President of the United States doesn't quite agree with everybody in his administration. So it's always a bit of a crapshoot what's going to happen when one of these high-level meetings takes place.
Indeed it is, and we'll have to wait and see what does happen tonight. Is the pressure, though, then actually on Europe, on countries like Germany, for example, to try and meet even that 1.5% target, but at least that 2% target that Trump has been kind of banging on about for the last couple of years?
Well, Germany's one of the main laggards. They're not the only one. Italy, another big ally, a founding member of NATO, is down at about 1.2% of GDP. And Canada, the Netherlands, also not performing as well as they should be. So Trump does have a point, even if his manner and methodology is rather obnoxious. And this is kind of a fault line in the alliance that could get worse if allies don't get more serious, particularly when the United States is paying more attention to China as the long-term strategic challenge. Europe needs to be in a position to carry more of the load inside NATO for NATO's sake, but also for Europe's sake. So again, Trump's method may be a little bit unbearable, but he has a point.
And just very finally, Alexander, yes or no, will NATO be celebrating its 80th birthday?
Mm-hmm. I think it will be, and not as a deceased alliance, but as a living alliance that is still prospering. I think, unfortunately, in 10 years, we're probably still going to be dealing with a hostile Russia. So maintaining and strengthening deterrence against Russia is going to be still at the top of the charts. But other threats, including China, which is a challenge for Europe, too. It's not so far away as it expands its infrastructure cooperation, its global navy, its activities up in the Arctic. China is something that Europe has to pay more attention to as well. So NATO will have a role in that, and it'll still be alive and kicking at its 80th birthday.
Good. Well, there we go. Optimism, at least, from Alexander Veszpró. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, here to discuss this is Arnhem Layets, who is a German MEP who sits with the Socialists and Democrats, Bodil Valero, who is a Swedish MEP who sits with the Greens and the EFA group, and Andrew Byrne, who's the Brussels correspondent with the Sunday Times. Arnhem, let's start with you, first of all. Are you as optimistic as our guest there, that NATO is in robust health?
Well, first of all, also happy birthday for me. I grew up in East Germany behind the Iron Curtain, and I learned how to throw bombs in high school in order to protect myself. So I was living in the Cold War, and now we are under the protection of NATO to have peace. And we also have peace treaties, the INF Treaty, which is under threat. So here I see a general question bringing up on that one. But NATO is an important alliance, and we have to rebuild and reorganize ourselves.
So if it's so important, then why is Germany refusing to get to the 2% target that NATO has set itself in terms of defence spending?
Well, that's a very important point. I became a new member here to the Parliament, and the agreement on the 2% is before we really reopened a whole new discussion in Europe. We are now talking about a European defence structure. We are talking about a European defence fund. So it's on pooling and sharing, bringing our capacity together. We are not as coherent as we could be. We are spending billion of money, of euros, which we could use much better. So it's not a question of 2%, it's a question of pooling and sharing of efficiency, and that is the new debate we have to bring up. Germany has to really invest in all their capacity in order that our military is working well, but we have to reopen this discussion with a new European defence structure, and I hope we will get there.
So, Bodil, the response then from the Germans is essentially, it's not about the amount you spend, it's about how efficient you are. For sure. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree totally. I come from a non-NATO country, and there we first ask ourselves, what do we need? And then we pay for what we need. We don't put a target that we have to spend so much of our budget to reach that target. The capacity, the defence capacity is the most important. And as a Green, my whole group, we do think in the same way. It's not about the money, it's about what do we get out of that money. In many cases, the countries, just to reach up more the level, what we can do is to buy arms. But if we don't have pilots for the planes, we don't need the planes. You know?
But ultimately, though, you know, NATO is protecting all of Europe, not just the countries that belong to it in a sense. Don't you feel with still a threatened Russia, with a potentially encroaching China, that actually NATO's role is more important than ever?
I think that, well, we already have NATO. Sweden has a lot of cooperation with NATO. We are many times more NATO than the NATO countries, according to NATO themselves, because we do have a lot of cooperation. But for us and for our country, it has been always the idea that if we join NATO, for example, then that is more of a threat to us as we have Russia as close.
Okay. Well, you're Irish, Andrew. You're also not in NATO. What's your take on
as a journalist, I can't join the NATO alliance, but it's true that Ireland is not. I mean, I think the problem with the transatlantic alliance as it is now is that all of the countries most of them are living in different universes. You have the US on one side with Trump and his sort of ambiguous or ambivalent commitment to the alliance and his hammering of Germany on this 2% spending limit. And on the other hand, you have, well, if you take, for instance, Germany, as you mentioned, the defence spending limit is not reached. And you also have a country which refuses, I mean, German politicians refuse to acknowledge that Russia is the primary military threat on the European continent. They refuse to acknowledge it.
So much so that they're taking their gas.
Indeed. And so is it any surprise why you have Central and Eastern European countries who are on the border with Russia, who feel nervous about their security with an ambivalent Trump White House, a Germany which can't even agree to name the primary threat it faces. And then on other European countries, I mean, I take your point that Sweden is not a NATO member, but there's an element of hypocrisy in that. I mean, Sweden is one of the world's biggest arms exporters. Your country and your parties and government there exports weapons, missile technology to Saudi Arabia, to United Arab Emirates.
We stopped it mostly.
Well, I mean, a little belatedly.
The United Nations Security Council, where the world's most pressing issues are discussed. And there's a new head at the table, Germany. It's taking over the presidency of the Security Council from France. On Germany's agenda, protecting humanitarian workers, arms controls, and promoting multilateralism. But things got off to a bumpy start. The German government plane that broke down with Angela Merkel on board last year, well, it blew a tyre upon landing in New York. And just in case any doubt, we'd like to confirm that that's not actually real footage of the plane. Brussels wants to crack down further on member states that flout its values. The Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans has called for a new debate on how to strengthen the rule of law in the EU, while announcing a new measure to protect judges in Poland and a warning for Romania to get its justice system in line.
The Union's capacity to uphold the rule of law is essential. First, because it's an issue of fundamental values, a matter of who we are. The functioning of the EU as a whole depends on the rule of law in all member states. Member states, economic operators and citizens need to be able to trust each other's legal systems, because it is essential for the internal market, for investments, for judicial cooperation across the EU. A problem in one member state is a problem for the Union as a whole.
Under current rules, the bloc can react to rule of law violations by triggering Article 7, but critics say the so-called nuclear option has lacked progress since it was used against Hungary and Poland. First of all, let's start with what Frans Timmermans had to say today. He's got a point, hasn't he?
I'm an anthropologist, researching at the same time as just other research institutions. And what I found now when it comes to the rule of law, the Sargentini report also showed that the research that is done into rule of law in Eastern Europe, or the knowledge, for example, is not enough. When they are attacking countries, they are not looking at the fact that in other countries the same rule of law violations are going on. So there needs to be a mechanism, but not a double standard one, and not for political reasons.
But they would say there's not a double standard in the sense that we and Hungary is part of the European Union, and there are set standards for every single country.
Yes, but while Hungary is called, for example, for anti-Roma march, which is not even happening anymore, Sweden is never called for Nazi marches around Swedish big countries, for example. Or now, for example, another member state is not called for desegregated education, while Hungary is hit heavily on it, which is not even true. I mean, so I believe that there needs to be good knowledge of how the member states are dealing with the rule of law, but at the same time I feel there must be a much better research into it. I mean, come on, the Roma parts of the Sargentini report is underestimating the EU, the EP. I mean, that's why I just wanted to propose not to put those lies into the report. We cannot.
Thomas, is it lies, or are Hungary being unduly done?
No, for sure not. Parts of my family come from Hungary. I still have connections to Hungary. I mean, reducing the media freedom or even actually...
No, I said on the Roma issue.
Well, probably on the Roma issue, but...
But you accept there are problems, though?
Yeah, I mean...
Which one? You mean
on media freedom? On media freedom, there's serious problems
not.
there. There's no media freedom in Hungary anymore.
What do you mean?
have blacklists of journalists. You have Austrian, German. You have even Libération journalists, which are on a blacklist as being uncomfortable. There's hardly any independent news anymore. The government controls. The government takes under control the whole public television sector. You are under heavy pressure if you are not complying with what the government wants you to do. Also, the influence on the juridical system. You know, the difference between Hungary and other states, where we have problems all across the Union. It's not just exclusively in the formerly East European countries. We have problems also with Roma politics, everywhere. It's a problem across the European Union. But Hungary is breaching European law constantly the last 10 years, constantly again and again and again. And that's why Hungary is a special problem within the European Union.
And which are the points on which?
I'm just going to bring Marie in here briefly. Isn't this, though, ultimately a sign that this is a mess, and B, that Section 7 isn't working?
Article 7, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, well, Hungary has been a pioneer in not respecting the European values. And Hungary, well, has been teaching other EU member states how to go around these European values. I mean, Poland has been following this example, Romania as well. And the problem with the European Union is that it has tools to protect the rule of law, but the tools it has are based on the goodwill of the European member states. It goes, you know, it is based on the idea that the European Union is a club of liberal democracies, and Romania, Poland and Hungary were very well aware of that when they decided to join the European Union. Now, not so much.
So is Timmermans' plan going to work?
Well, what plan? We don't have a lot of details.
Yes.
We don't have a lot of details on what they want. I mean, this was about just starting a debate that should have been started way back. I mean, in Romania, it's been 2 years since they've been trying to reform the judicial system. In Hungary, we're talking like since 2010, so it's been 9 years now. I mean, it's been a long time since there are problems.
What I can understand is that everyone pretty much says that Hungary is doing this, apart from you guys. So is everyone else wrong and you're right?
I don't think so. I think there are so many people in Europe now, finally, who dare to stand up for these values and for the double standard.
What values are there? Authoritarianism, strong leadership?
Not at all. A very strong family-valued leadership is going on there. You should ask the people. I mean, 3 times they vote for them. I don't think that they mind having this government. And even if the liberal media, you were saying that all the media in Hungary, I mean, all those media are being sort of centralized now that were centralized in other places. I mean, if you blame the government to buy the newspapers up, you should see who they are buying it from. And you should also see that the government can only buy newspapers who are being sold by the socialists.
You're just recreating that picture of some kind of international conspiracy.
Yes, but how come 14 years ago you didn't say anything?
This is completely ridiculous.
No, how come 14 years ago you didn't say anything against the socialist media? How come you didn't say anything?
It's not a question on which government is there. We're also opposing a social democratic government in Romania.
I remember I was here. No, in Hungary, against the Hungarian government, you never
It's about European values. It's not about this or that government. Every single country signed up to a canon of values.
So how come you didn't say anything with the socialist government?
But they are saying something on Romania. Timmermans actually talked a lot about
Romania. Do you remember the Magyar Garda case? You didn't say a word.
No, but how come you now say that Timmermans is a socialist?
I suspect we're not going to settle this debate here and now. It is one that is going to continue, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. And that was the week that was. But Raw Politics will be back on Monday at 6 p.m. Brussels time as we look forward to another emergency EU Council meeting on Brexit. Join us then for another momentous week in European politics.